Chuck Norris couldn't or wouldn't do. The 86-year-old, long deemed invincible, has died suddenly, leaving his legion of fans in shock.
9 days before he died, Chuck Norris posted a video of himself sparring under the Hawaiian sun. He was 86 years old, shirtless, throwing punches with the same intensity he'd carried since he was a young airman learning to fight in South Korea. In the caption, he wrote something that fans would replay thousands of times in the days that followed. He didn't age, he leveled up. 9 days later, on a Thursday morning on the island of Kauai, that leveling up came to an end. The man who had survived a decade of internet death hoaxes, declared dead on Facebook, in fake news posts, in viral rumors that spread faster than any of his films ever could, had actually passed away, quietly, the way very few larger-than-life figures ever get to. What he left behind wasn't just a body of work spanning almost 6 decades. It was a fortune built from karate tournaments, a television show that nearly collapsed before it started, a secret daughter kept hidden for almost 30 years, a wife who nearly died from a medical treatment gone wrong, and a legal war with one of the biggest networks in America. This is the real story of what Chuck Norris built, who is set to inherit it, and how a man famous for being unbreakable spent his final years fighting battles that had nothing to do with martial arts at all. On March 18, 2026, Chuck Norris was rushed to a hospital on Kauai following what his family would only ever describe as a medical emergency. He had been staying at the oceanfront property he and his wife owned on the island's north shore, a home the couple had treasured for years as a retreat from the ranch life they lived in Texas. According to people who spoke with him just a day before, Norris had been in good spirits, training and cracking jokes with a friend on the phone. Whatever happened, happened fast. By the next morning, March 19th, he was gone. For a man who had been mistakenly declared dead so many times that his own fans had grown numb to the rumors, the real announcement landed strangely. Over the years, false reports claimed he'd died in a car accident, succumbed to COVID-19, and suffered fatal medical episodes that never actually happened. Each time, Norris outlived the headline. So when his family finally posted a statement on his official Instagram account, many people online assumed it was another hoax before they even opened it. It wasn't. The family's message was short, careful, and noticeably light on detail. They didn't disclose a cause of death. What they did share was a description of a man who, to the world, had been a martial artist, an actor, and a symbol of toughness, but who, to them, had simply been a husband, a father, a grandfather, and the center of their family. They thanked fans not just for watching his movies, but for loving him. That distinction, small as it seems, says something about what the family wanted people to remember once the tributes stopped pouring in. And the tributes did pour in, fast and from unlikely corners. Political figures who rarely agreed on anything found common ground in praising his toughness and character. Media outlets that had clashed with him in courtrooms over the years put out respectful, almost warm obituaries. Major news organizations that don't often devote extended coverage to action stars ran full retrospectives on his career, tracing the arc from a shy Air Force enlistee to a man whose name had become internet shorthand for indestructibility. For a brief moment, a man whose politics had often put him at odds with Hollywood was mourned by all of it at once. What made the reaction especially striking was the sheer range of people who felt entitled to grieve him. Fellow martial artists spoke about his role in legitimizing the sport in American popular culture. Younger audiences who had never seen a single one of his 1980s action films still knew him purely through the Chuck Norris facts meme phenomenon of the early 2000s, an internet joke format built entirely around exaggerating his toughness that somehow introduced him to an entirely new generation decades after his box office peak. Fitness enthusiasts who grew up watching his infomercials in the middle of the night thanked him for products that had nothing to do with acting at all. And longtime fans of Walker, Texas Ranger flooded social media with clips from a show that had been off the air for over 2 decades but never really left syndicated rotation. Then, almost immediately, the attention turned to money. Financial outlets and celebrity press moved quickly to answer the question fans were already asking in the comment sections. What was Chuck Norris actually worth when he died? The consistent figure, cited by multiple entertainment and finance publications, landed at approximately $70 million. It's a big number, but on its own it barely scratches the surface of the story. The more interesting question isn't the total, it's how he built it, piece by piece, decade by decade, and what happens to it now. Norris's estate wasn't the product of one blockbuster payday. It was built the way he built everything else in his life. Slowly, stubbornly, and often on his own terms even when it meant fighting people far more powerful than he was. His holdings at the time of his death reportedly included the Lone Wolf Ranch in Navasota, Texas, a sprawling property of roughly 1,000 acres in Grimes County that had served as the family's primary home since he largely stepped back from Hollywood around 2012. They included the oceanfront home on Kauai where he passed away. They included decades of film and television royalties, endorsement income that stretched back to the 1980s, book sales, and a water bottling company that started as nothing more than an accident during a routine drilling project. No public will has surfaced, which isn't unusual for a private family. Under Texas community property law, a surviving spouse is generally entitled to a substantial share of marital property acquired during the marriage, with the rest typically flowing to children depending on how assets were structured and titled. Norris was survived by his wife, Gina O'Kelly, and 5 children from different points in his life, some from his first marriage, one from a relationship that stayed hidden from the public for decades. His wife already holds a controlling majority stake in the family's water company as its CEO, which means that piece of the empire is unlikely to be disrupted no matter how the rest of the estate eventually gets divided among the children. To understand how a former karate instructor from a broken home in Oklahoma ended up with a fortune like this, you have to go back to the very beginning, long before anyone called him a Texas Ranger or a meme. Carlos Ray Norris was born on March 10, 1940, in the small town of Ryan, Oklahoma. He nearly didn't survive infancy. Doctors labeled him a blue baby, a term used for newborns who enter the world with dangerously low oxygen levels. It was an inauspicious start for a man who would later become a global symbol of physical toughness. His mother, Wilma, was a devoted Christian who worked a string of low-paying jobs to keep her 3 sons fed while largely raising them on her own. His father, Ray, was a World War II veteran who came home changed by the war and struggled with alcoholism for years, often disappearing from the household for extended stretches. In interviews and in his own writing later in life, Norris described a strange, uncomfortable truth about his childhood. The house felt calmer when his father was gone. When Ray was present, everyone in the family walked carefully, unsure what mood he'd bring home. The family bounced from Oklahoma to Kansas to California, chasing work that never quite paid enough to get ahead. By the time young Carlos graduated from North Torrance High School in 1958, he was, by his own account, a shy, slightly built teenager who had never really succeeded at anything difficult. He wasn't an athlete. He wasn't confident. Nobody who knew him at 17 would have guessed what was coming. That same year, he enlisted in the United States Air Force and married his high school sweetheart, Diane Holchek. She was 17. He was 18. The Air Force stationed him in South Korea, and it was there, almost by accident, that he wandered into a Tang Soo Do class at Ozan Air Base and discovered the thing that would eventually define his entire public identity. He trained obsessively, hours a day, night after night, under a Korean instructor, and within roughly a year he had earned his black belt. He later described it as the first time in his life he had accomplished something genuinely difficult purely through his own effort. That single realization mattered more than the belt itself. It gave a quiet, overlooked kid from Oklahoma proof that he was capable of hard things, and once someone internalizes that kind of proof, they tend to spend the rest of their life chasing more of it. After his discharge from the Air Force in the early 1960s, Norris tried and failed to become a police officer, landing on a waiting list instead. To fill the time and pay the bills, he began teaching karate out of his parents' backyard. What started as a side hustle grew into a genuine business empire. Within a few years, he had built a chain of martial arts studios across Southern California, attracting a clientele that included some of the biggest names in entertainment at the time. He became a 6-time professional karate champion and, by the end of the 1960s, had claimed one of the sport's most prestigious titles. It was at a tournament in New York in the late 1960s that his life changed permanently. Bruce Lee, already a rising star in martial arts circles, noticed Norris competing and sought him out afterward. The two became close friends and training partners, spending years sparring and debating fighting philosophy in Lee's backyard in Los Angeles. Their mutual respect and rivalry pushed both men to improve, and eventually Lee called in a favor that would introduce Norris to the world. Lee was directing a film in Rome and needed someone to play the villain in the climactic fight scene, set at the Roman Colosseum. Permission to film there had been denied by Italian authorities, so the crew shot anyway, working quickly and quietly over just a few days. The film, Way of the Dragon, was made on a shoestring budget and went on to earn back its investment many times over, becoming a global hit. Norris became internationally recognizable for losing that fight on screen, A defeat delivered by a man he would later call the greatest martial artist who ever lived. When Lee died unexpectedly in 1973, his widow moved into a home near the Norris family, and Norris spent countless evenings with them, sharing stories about Bruce with his young son. It was around this time that another close friend, actor and fellow martial arts student Steve McQueen, encouraged Norris to pursue acting seriously, telling him he had the screen presence. He just needed to learn the craft. Norris took the advice. His earliest film roles paid modestly, but he kept working, kept building, and eventually reached a point where he and his producers were confident enough in one of his projects that, when no studio would distribute it, they rented out theaters themselves to show it. The gamble paid off. By the early 1990s, Norris had appeared in more than 20 films and had built himself into a legitimate action star with a loyal, dedicated audience. But it wasn't the movies that would ultimately cement him as a permanent fixture of American pop culture. That distinction belonged to a television show that almost didn't survive its first season. Walker, Texas Ranger, premiered on CBS in the spring of 1993, and it very nearly collapsed within months. The production company behind it went bankrupt during that first season, having completed only a handful of episodes before funding dried up entirely. The show was on the verge of cancellation when CBS looked at the premiere ratings and reconsidered. A substantial share of television sets in use that Saturday night had been tuned to a mid-budget action drama about a karate-fighting Texas lawman, enough to convince the network to find new financial partners and keep it alive. What followed was 9 seasons and more than 200 episodes, making it one of the first primetime dramas in American television history filmed entirely within Texas. Norris exercised significant creative control through his own production company, insisted on morally grounded storylines that reflected his Christian faith, brought his brother on as a producer, and even performed the show's theme song himself. CBS later credited the arrangement with delivering nearly a decade of reliably on-time, on-budget production, a rarity in the industry. Financially, the show became a machine. Norris was reportedly paid a substantial per-episode fee along with a meaningful percentage of the show's profits, and across the full run of the series his acting fees alone reportedly totaled in the tens of millions of dollars. Syndication expanded the show's reach even further, with international broadcasters paying significant sums to air it, eventually distributing Walker, Texas Ranger in more than 100 countries. Total franchise revenue across its lifetime has been reported in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That success, though, came with a legal fight that would drag on for years. In 2018, Norris filed suit against CBS and Sony, alleging that the companies owed him tens of millions of dollars in unpaid profit participation. His legal team argued that the networks had structured streaming and distribution deals in ways specifically designed to avoid triggering his contractual share, and that the studios had failed to report streaming revenue to him for close to 2 decades. It was a striking accusation from a man whose public image had always leaned toward humble, faith-driven, and largely apolitical when it came to Hollywood's business practices. The case dragged through the legal system for roughly 5 years before both sides reached a settlement in 2023, with the terms kept confidential. Whatever amount CBS ultimately paid to resolve the dispute became part of the estate his family now inherits. A quiet, private resolution to a very public grievance, and a reminder that even a star known for playing by-the-book heroes on screen was willing to go to war over what he believed he was owed in real life. Behind the image of the devoted family man that Norris cultivated publicly for decades was a story he kept hidden for nearly 30 years. In 1962, while awaiting his discharge from the Air Force in California, Norris met a woman named Johanna at a bar and began a brief relationship without disclosing that he was already married. The relationship produced a daughter, born in early 1963, whom Johanna raised entirely on her own after discovering Norris's marital status. She later told her daughter the truth when the girl was a teenager, but gave her clear instructions. He already had a wife and children, and she should not make contact. For more than 2 decades, that daughter, Dina, carried the name of a father she had never met. It wasn't until Norris's divorce from his first wife became public in the late 1980s that Dina finally decided to write him a letter. In his own later writing, Norris described the moment he first saw her standing in his living room. He said he didn't need any test or proof to know instantly that she was his daughter. He simply recognized his own face looking back at him, and the two of them wept together. He later spoke publicly about the experience, offering a reflection that became one of the more quoted lines of his life, that there might be such a thing as an illegitimate parent, and that he had been one, but there was no such thing as an illegitimate child. Dina was fully welcomed into the family from that point forward, and photos of them together in later years, including at the same property in Hawaii where he would eventually pass away, show a relationship that, while it began under complicated circumstances, ultimately became a genuine part of his life.